Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Hot Mike. I'm Bill Whittle, and we're talking today about the entire idea of how movies and television and the entire pop culture, which used to venerate police officers, law enforcement officials, sheriffs in the westerns, and so on and so forth, how that culture that used to venerate them has now come to the point where they've, at the very least, shown a great deal of disrespect, and in many cases, in fact, perhaps even most cases, have made law enforcement officers either pawns to get shot by guys in video games or in movies, or made them actively simply the villains. And the society at large is going to pay a price for something like that. We're very honored and pleased, I certainly am pleased, to have with us as a guest is our Tarrant County Sheriff, Bill Waybourn, who joins us again from Texas. And Sheriff Waybourn, you undoubtedly remember a little earlier this last year, I suppose it was, the quarterback for the 49ers, Colin Kaepernick, refused to stand during the national anthem. And he said it was a protest. He was on the side of the Black Lives Matter movement. He said he wasn't going to stand for the national anthem. He was going to take a knee because of all of the violence inflicted on people by the police officers in this country. Most people in this country had a lot to say about that, and I think Colin Kaepernick exercised his right to free speech, and we got to exercise ours as well. But these kind of things are seen by people, and they're seen by young people, and they're seen by people who perhaps are on the fence about this whole thing, and they see something like this, and it legitimizes the idea. There's an NFL quarterback on his knee behind a U.S. Marine, by the way, which is ironic enough. He's on his knee, and basically he's saying, I'm not going to stand up for this country with its racist, murdering policemen. This delegitimizes police authority, and it contributes to this narrative that I think just simply does not exist. It's not to say there are not bad cops out there. It's not to say that every now and then there is something that's really either very suspicious or, in fact, downright something that the officer needs to be prosecuted for, and they usually are. But this idea that police officers just go around, beating up and murdering people is made authentic when somebody like Colin Kaepernick takes a knee. And I maintain it makes your job a lot more dangerous.
You are exactly right, and I would also say this: statistically, the corrupt police officer is less than 1%. You'll find more corruption among, ironically, ministers and judges and attorneys, as I understand the statistics. And I always say is when I'm talking to people out in the community, I always try to reinforce that really only 2% of the people in the world need to be watched. Half of one of those percents need to be in prison for the rest of their natural life. Half of 1% really needs to get out of politics, and then there's 1% that's going to constantly be with us and cause issues. And in law enforcement, we're doing that. But every cop that I've known worldwide simply wants to be the guardian. He wants to stand between evil and good for the good citizens, and it's a calling. And as you well said a while ago, it's part of their virtues. And when they lose the support of the community, they do go home going, why am I here and what am I doing? And that's the tragedy. As we mentioned boobies, it's kind of like high noon many years ago when Gary Cooper, the community turned against him when he was trying to rail in 5 bad guys. He stood his ground and he did his job and he stood up to his oath, but afterwards he said, I'm getting out of the business. And ironically, I think that if this anti-police narrative does not get turned around, that we will not and are not recruiting the best of the best. And that's a tragedy for the community.
I was doing some research into the entire premise of Black Lives Matter movement, and the latest statistics I could find were for 2014. And in 2014, it turns out of all the black homicides, of all the black people that were killed in this country, in 2014, 6% of them died at the hands of policemen. And, sir, that's not 6% who had their hands up and were just shot in cold blood, as they want you to believe. That's the total number of homicides of black people were caused by, I can't, honestly, God, I remember if it was 4% or 6%. It was something like that. I think it was 4%, come to think of it. And my point is, if you're going to make a movement about 4% of the problem and you're going to ignore 96% of the problem, that's not a serious movement. What is your attitude as a law enforcement officer to bad cops, to cops who go too far? Sometimes bad people get in there. Sometimes the stress of the job is more than they can take. But what's your attitude towards that handful, that really very small handful of police officers that do cross that line?
we exit them out of law enforcement is what we do. You know, is the simple SOP: if you lie, cheat, or steal, and that cheating includes if you abuse people, if you don't respect people, we're going to ask you to leave the organization, and we're going to stand with that and say, you need to go do something else. This is not where we need you. And I know that most administrators across the country feel the same way, and most leaders in law enforcement, and more importantly, the officer on the street feels that way. He doesn't want those people in here either.
Yeah, it makes his job much more difficult and makes his life much more dangerous. Finally, Sheriff, I just ask you this. I guess this kind of question's more rhetorical than anything, but what do we do about this? I mean, I think that you mentioned that maybe 1% of police officers are corrupt. I suspect about 1% is the number of Hollywood executives that aren't corrupt. There is this gigantic machine out here that's determined to push this I don't know. I think it's the same thing with George Lopez, Sheriff. I think Lopez made that tweet because he wanted street credibility, right? He wanted to look tough. He wanted to look like he wasn't going to take any crap from authority. And it's all this kind of posturing. I know for a certain fact if George Lopez ever had anybody break into his house, he'd be on the phone to the police right away. I don't suspect he'd be calling any MS-13 people come over and bail him out. What do we do about this? Aside from the fact that every police officer out there has got this burden, in addition to now their law enforcement burden and their hazard to their lives, they also have to be publicity agents as well, don't they? They have to be goodwill ambassadors and try to overcome this bias that's coming from over the hill behind me here.
What I think that has to happen, obviously, is some of the things that we're doing here is creating a relationship with our community, regardless if it's a Latino community or African American community. We want relationships with all those. But with George Lopez and people like him, is one, I don't know that I can change their minds. I don't know that I can get them to come over to our side of thinking we're not here to hurt people, we're here to help. But the best thing I can do for him today is he's invited at any time to my agency, and I want him to try to figure out where these bad cops are, and I'll be happy to put him in the squad car with great police officers who stand between evil and good every day, and let him stand with them for a little while and see what he thinks after that. If he would come out and experience this, I think, and maybe speak from an educated standpoint instead of a prejudicial standpoint, which he does. So I just extend that invitation to them. Come on. Let's come on out here and get in our shoes and walk a mile in our shoes and see what you think afterwards, and see if we can help.
Did you hear that, George Lopez? That was the sheriff of Tarrant County offering you a chance to come in and spend a day with law enforcement and find out what the police are actually like. And I'm calling you out on it, and although I don't speak for the NRA, I suspect they are calling you out on it too. Why don't you go out there and see what it's like? Because I can tell you one thing, George, I've seen a number of people make comments like the ones you make, and every now and then, they'll either go on a ride along for the day or they'll go to one of those training classes where they will put a gun in your hand, George. They'll put a gun with blanks in your hand, and they will put you in the kind of situations that policemen have to face every single day in this country. And after you go through an hour of that, you are going to feel differently about all of this. So either you're ignorant about this. I don't think that's the truth. I think you're doing it for ratings for your new show. And by the way, before we let you go, Sheriff, I just want to show you the George Lopez clip for a show that's about to open, because if you think back to The Matrix, take a look at this and tell me what you think.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm back. And I got a brand new HBO comedy special, and it is live from Washington, D.C. Lots changed since the last time I was here. So I'll be addressing the most important social issues facing our country today, like how organic is organic, dogs and strollers, and the rise of newer and even more exotic sounding food allergies. Oh yeah, and this. You should really tune in. It's gonna be very satisfying.
Imagine my surprise when you see George Lopez with a sledgehammer knocking down a wall, and it's in slow motion and the chips are flying. It looks exactly like The Matrix, and then he's holding his sledgehammer, big, tough guy, Mr. Rebel, and all the rest of it. Sheriff, I hope he takes you up on that offer, and I really hope he does. I suspect he won't, but I hope he does. And for people like me who live here in Los Angeles, I just want to tell you personally that it gives me a chance to sleep a little more comfortably at night. Not only that knowing that their law enforcement is out there, but that the people that I grew up respecting as heroes, the sheriffs and so on, that I always respected as heroes, are in fact real people that really live out there. And you're certainly a great example of one of those. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thank you, Bill.
We just barely have time to add one thing here to go out on a somewhat happier note. Don't forget that challenge, George, okay? Don't forget. We were talking about this story all last week, and we just got one little button on the end of this to give you very, very quickly. The Donald Trump versus CNN thing, remember, where CNN intimidated this guy for making one? Well, as it turns out, they've come up with the all-time king of these Donald Trump versus the CNN meme video things. So let's just run it real quick, and we'll get on out of here.